Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a topic that absolutely sits at the heart of organizational integrity and executive leadership, the CIPS Code of Conduct. Specifically, we're looking at procurement ethics and conflict management. If you're a C-suite leader, a procurement pro, or a project manager, you know that the frameworks we're about to discuss aren't just, tick box compliance exercises. No way. They are the critical defense mechanisms keeping your organization's bottom line and reputation safe. So let's jump right in. What actually happens when personal loyalty collides with professional responsibility? Honestly, it's the ultimate test of leadership. The reality is, just one single unresolved conflict of interest can absolutely devastate trust, completely destroy fairness, and derail an entire multi-million-dollar procurement process. And look, we aren't just talking about malicious intent here. We're talking about those subtle, everyday overlaps of our personal and professional lives. They can quietly introduce massive risk in your supply chain before you even realize what's happening. To navigate all these risks, here's our roadmap for today. First, the core ethical challenge. Second, the conflict of interest spectrum. Third, the 4R protocol framework. Fourth, maintaining supplier impartiality. And finally, the 5-step ethical check. All right, let's start with Section 1, the core ethical challenge, understanding risks. As leaders, you already know it's absolutely crucial to recognize that supplier relationships can unintentionally create these hidden ethical risks. It's like a minefield out there sometimes. Our objective right now is to uncover the specific frameworks that protect procurement integrity. We're going to clearly break down the different types of conflicts, look at exactly how to declare and manage them, and really lock in those unwavering principles of fair, transparent supplier treatment. The whole foundation of this is Commitment 3 of the CIPS Code of Conduct, which mandates the total eradication of unethical practices. Take a look at the 3 pillars holding up organizational credibility here: transparency, impartiality, and accountability. Ethical procurement isn't just some nice-to-have bonus. It's a strict, non-negotiable requirement to protect competition and public trust. We have to declare conflicts, treat every supplier fairly, and actively push for ethical conduct across the entire supply chain. Because, if even one of those pillars cracks, the whole structure of stakeholder trust comes crashing down with it. Moving right along to Section 2, conflict of interest spectrum, types of conflicts. Okay, so let's start with a really clear baseline. By definition, a conflict of interest is a direct clash between a professional duty and a private interest that could compromise business impartiality. Sounds pretty simple on paper, right? But out there in the real world, in the complex web of global business, joint ventures, and our massive professional networks, these clashes are almost never perfectly black and white. That nuance actually breaks down into 3 distinct types: actual, potential, and perceived. An actual conflict is that direct, right-in-front-of-you clash, like evaluating a tender where a close relative is the main bidder. Then there's a potential conflict. This is a situation that could lead to a clash down the road, say your spouse taking a job at one of your strategic suppliers. But I really want to draw your attention to that third column, perceived conflict. This happens when a reasonable observer might suspect bias, even if you are operating with 100% integrity. For executives watching this, heed this warning. In procurement, perception is literally just as damaging as reality. A perceived conflict can trigger audit findings, supplier complaints, and massive reputational damage just as fast as an actual one. Let's jump into Section 3, the 4R protocol framework. Manage conflicts early. When a conflict does pop up, hesitation is absolutely your worst enemy. You need an actionable, structured game plan. And that is where the 4R protocol comes in. Step 1, register. You've got to record the conflict immediately. Step 2, restrict. Limit that conflicted individual's access to sensitive information. Step 3, refer or review. Bring in an independent third party, like legal, compliance, or audit, to look at things impartially. And finally, Step 4, remove. If the conflict just can't be resolved, the individual has to be completely withdrawn from the process. Actually, let me pause for a second and ask you, right now, today, do you know exactly where your organization's conflict of interest register is? If you don't, consider that your very first action item the second this explainer ends. All right, Section 4, maintaining supplier impartiality, ensuring fairness. So the most severe danger to impartiality is information asymmetry. That's the highly flawed practice of giving unequal access or hidden criteria to certain suppliers. To keep competitive neutrality intact, you absolutely must provide the exact same information to all suppliers at the exact same time, period. You've got to rely on objective evaluation criteria with rigorously documented scoring. Maintaining a totally airtight audit trail isn't just about passing an audit, It's about guaranteeing procedural fairness so that the genuinely best supplier actually wins the bid. Structuring these relationships properly relies on the ethical supplier relationship guidelines pyramid. Down at the base, you've got non-negotiable legal compliance. In the middle is operational integrity. This is the home for your registers and your gifts and hospitality policies. And up at the peak, we have sustainable and value-driven ethical sourcing. But notice that warning tag attached to the middle tier? Even tiny gestures can create massive perception risks. Accepting a simple dinner from a supplier during an active tender period might seem completely harmless to you, but to the rest of the market, it compromises your competitive neutrality entirely. Which brings us to Section 5, the 5-step ethical check, testing scenarios. Before we walk through this tool, let's take a quick second to mentally prepare. We're going to apply our professional judgment to a real high-stakes dilemma. As I describe it, I want you to think about what the true ethical risk is and exactly what you would do in this situation. Okay, here's a scenario. Your close friend's company is bidding on a major tender that you're overseeing. You're at a casual weekend get-together, and they pull you aside to casually ask if certain evaluation areas in the RFP will receive quote-unquote special attention. It's just a friendly chat, nothing in writing. So what is the ethical risk here? What would you do? Let's step methodically through the 5-step check to figure this out. 1. Is it legal? Well, maybe, but it's highly risky. 2. Is it transparent? Absolutely not. 3. Is it fair and objective? No way. Giving a friend insider hints totally destroys competitive neutrality. 4. The front page test. Would you be comfortable seeing this little conversation reported on the front page of tomorrow's business news? Definitely not. And 5. Does it protect stakeholder trust? No. The rule here is absolute. If you hesitate at any single step, you stop and escalate. In this scenario, the only right path is to firmly refuse to answer your friend, immediately declare the whole situation on your organization's register, and recuse yourself from the evaluation process if needed. All right, let's wrap up with the key takeaways from our explainer today. First, you've got to identify actual, potential, and perceived conflicts early. Second, leverage that 4R protocol: register, restrict, refer, remove, to manage them like a pro. Third, maintain strict impartiality and competitive neutrality with all your suppliers. And fourth, always remember that the perception of bias is just as harmful as actual bias. Now keep in mind, not all ethical threats come from personal relationships or casual missteps. The concepts we've unpacked today really lay the groundwork for tackling much darker issues like bribery, corruption, and modern slavery, which are just absolutely critical topics for any procurement leader to master. To wrap things up, I want to leave you with this final, thought-provoking quote. Integrity is tested most when no rule explicitly tells you what to do. As C-suite leaders and procurement professionals, your true value isn't just following the obvious rules. It's navigating those tricky gray areas with unshakable ethical frameworks. Think about your current supplier relationships for a second. Are there any gray areas you've maybe been ignoring? Use the tools we discussed today to shine a light on them before they become tomorrow's headlines. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep leading with integrity. In any procurement career, there is a recurring stress test: the moment private loyalty collides with professional duty. Looking at this central question, we confront the reality of the profession. One unresolved conflict of interest can undermine trust, procedural fairness, and the functional finality of an entire procurement process. CIPS Commitment 3 mandates the eradication of unethical practices. To maintain organizational credibility, we rely on 3 explicit pillars: transparency, impartiality, and accountability. These concepts operate as load-bearing structures. They physically uphold public and supplier trust in the market mechanism. Many professionals operate under a dangerous assumption. They believe that as long as they harbor no malicious intent and commit no actual bid rigging, the tender remains mathematically safe. That assumption fails under scrutiny. In procurement risk management, the mere perception of bias compromises the structural integrity of a tender, exposing it to similar legal and procedural challenges as actual fraud.
Because a process must be defensible to outside observers, a practitioner's honest intent often matters less than the documented neutrality of the result. To understand this vulnerability, we apply the conflict of interest spectrum. This is a rigid risk classification tool, not a subjective judgment of your character. An actual conflict is a direct clash between professional duty and private interest, such as scoring a tender where a relative is the primary bidder. A potential conflict is a latent vulnerability. It is a situation, like your spouse working for a strategic supplier, that could shift into an active clash. Here on the right side is the perceived conflict. This occurs when an observer suspects bias. Notice the amber warning box. Perception is as damaging as reality. The business impact at the bottom translates directly to audit findings, reputational damage, and legal disputes. The mechanism behind this damage is entirely predictable. Auditors and losing suppliers do not measure internal intent. They measure procedural friction and external optics. Consequently, the organization is vulnerable to honest professionals whose innocent, undocumented missteps look compromised to an external auditor. Let's examine how a perceived conflict functionally ruins a tender's mechanics. We can visualize this through a network node diagram. When data flows unequally to various supplier nodes, the network structure becomes unstable and fractures. We call this information asymmetry. The hidden distribution of unequal access, criteria, or timing among competing suppliers acts as the root cause of market failure in supply chains. The required systemic correction is competitive neutrality. As detailed on the right side glass panes, this framework guarantees equality. Competitive neutrality dictates that exact same information reaches all suppliers simultaneously, relying entirely on objective evaluation criteria and documented scoring. Rigorous audit trails and documented scoring serve as your only defense against accusations of asymmetry. Applying neutral evaluation criteria across all bidders enforces a stable, highly competitive supplier ecosystem. Competitive neutrality acts as the structural requirement for acquiring true market value without legal interference. To proactively filter out the risks of asymmetry, we deploy a layered defense architecture. This is the procurement ethics pyramid, built on a non-negotiable base of legal compliance. Above that sits operational integrity, managing gifts and hospitality. The warning label is critical. Small gestures create massive perception risks. To maintain this operational integrity, you need a mechanical filter to process anomalies before they escalate. We use the 4R protocol as an auditable algorithm for conflict resolution. Step 1 is register, creating an instant paper trail. Steps 2 and 3 are restrict and refer, building firewalls and transferring oversight. Step 4 is remove, the ultimate failsafe. The 4R protocol protects the tender by removing individual emotional judgment from the equation. It replaces it with an objective, auditable corporate system. Let's apply these abstract frameworks to a high-risk, real-world scenario. Consider the dilemma presented in this box. Your close friend's company is bidding on a major tender, and he casually asks whether certain evaluation areas will receive special attention. This is an explicit attempt to induce information asymmetry. It threatens to shift a potential conflict into an active clash. For the individual practitioner, the immediate emergency response tool is the 5-step ethical check. Looking at the first 3 panels, we walk through baseline operational checks. Is it legal, transparent, fair, and objective? But the ultimate gauge for perceived conflict is the 4th panel, the front page test. Would you be comfortable seeing this reported in tomorrow's newspaper? The operational rule is absolute. Hesitation at any single step demands an immediate halt, refusal, and escalation via the 4R protocol. Structural frameworks protect the organization only if individuals possess the discipline to trigger them at the very first sign of friction, long before a rule is actively broken. Ethical procurement requires a meticulously engineered state of competitive neutrality. Returning to our network diagram, when information asymmetry is eradicated, data lines flow equally and simultaneously to all nodes. This creates a stable, perfectly balanced geometric web where the entire supply chain functions efficiently. In procurement risk, perception is reality. Identifying perceived conflicts early saves the ecosystem from collapsing under scrutiny. It ultimately comes down to individual judgment. As the quote here reminds us, integrity is tested most when no rule explicitly tells you what to do. True professional integrity means proactively engineering out the shadows where doubt breeds. In our next analysis, we will confront the darker, deliberate threats to the supply chain: bribery, corruption, and modern slavery.